Welcome everyone to the Strippin' the Dippin' podcast. I'm sure you can tell that I am not AMG Dens. I am your special host for today. My name is Dr.Obbs. AMG Dens is off on a beach somewhere, maybe sipping Mai Tais, feeling the breeze because AMG Dens is super chill. That's right. But you got me today, Dr. Obbs, and I am super excited about our special guest today. His name is Blake, and he goes by Brrrake on Twitter and YouTube and all kinds of other platforms. How's it going today, Blake?
Man, Dr. Obbs, I am spectacular. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm just super psyched to be on the pod today with another fellow Texas boy.
Yes, sir.
So we're just a couple Texas kids living in the UK, aren't we?
Yeah, how did we get so far away? I like it here, so I'm happy.
Yeah,
It's
it's
probably a little bit
great.
warmer down where I'm at than you, but I'm surviving.
That's right. That's right. We are surviving. And I'll tell you what, when I was going through your background, Blake, I was super impressed. So let me just introduce you. Let me give you the dap right now that you
Oh my
deserve. All right.
god.
So nearly 11 years as an engineer in Formula One, 3 years with Force India, 7 years with Red Bull Racing. 4 of those seasons were as a performance engineer for Dani Kvyat and Max Verstappen. When you were at Force India, you were a performance engineer for Checo Perez. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and DiResta before that. So
Wow.
it was actually 6 seasons on the road. On the road
Wow.
again.
That's incredible. I mean, okay, so let's really start there. What got you into motorsports? What got you into motorsports engineering?
Man, that's a wacky question because I'll just wrap it up super tight. Like, I'm 18, 19. I have no idea what I want to do. I start getting into cars a little bit, and then a buddy says, "Hey, we've got a spec Miata race car. Like, we've got a bunch of tires, and we've got a membership at the club, which was super, super fortunate and like insanely generous. Like, I appreciate that. It's not something that grows on trees, right? So we got into that, and I was like, cool, race cars, kind of cool. How do we go faster? So I was like, okay, I should be a mechanical engineer if I want to do race cars. And then the whole thing, Formula SAE or Formula Student, which is the collegiate design competition where you build and race a small Formula car, the whole thing snowballed. And I was just super amped about engineering and race cars. And it's like, cool. So get a job in NASCAR. Nobody returned my calls. Like, I'd send emails like, hey, I've been doing this for ages. I'm really passionate. I've done all these projects. Like, look, I'm super hungry. And everybody's like, that's great. Do you have any racing experience? I'm like, no. But I moved to the UK and got a degree at a motorsport master's degree at one of the big universities that do that course over in the UK. And it's just connections, people. And then before I know it, I was in vehicle dynamics at Force India.
Wow, that's
And
amazing. So you
and
decided.
it sounds like all this stuff just happens, but it's like right time, right place, um, networking, and but I guess you make your own luck, don't you? I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but with these kinds of things, timing, there is certainly a little bit of luck involved, but I'll tell you what, it certainly
100%.
sounds like you're passionate for the topic as well, right? So I think
Yeah,
that's one of the things that definitely comes off for anybody that follows you on any of your streams of content creation is that you're absolutely passionate for the sport, and that comes off right away.
yeah. It's a weird one
Yeah.
because I like it was hard because I started doing gaming content, and that's how I got into creating content. And then once that got moving, I was like, well, I should probably do motorsport content at some point. And I was kind of hesitant because I didn't want to leverage, I was still in the industry. I didn't want to be like, hey, I still work here and I still do that. So that was one of those things. And it's like, but I'm so passionate about it. And like I'm so excited when I talk to you or anybody else and we have conversations. I get like genuinely excited. So I was like, you know what? Yeah, we should talk about that.
And this is the perfect opportunity on the podcast today to really get into some of that. I know a lot of our listeners are thinking, what is life like behind the scenes? What is life like, on the pit wall, right? So I guess one of the first things, that I'd like to ask is, you spent quite a bit of time as a performance engineer. And maybe people don't really understand what a performance engineer does, what their role is, how they kind of contribute to the track performance of the team. Can you kind of dive into some of the details of that? What's that all about?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the structure of a race team, and let's start with a car specifically, right? So most people are very familiar with your race engineer, your chief engineer, right, and your strategist. So let's go into the car performance side, which starts with the chief engineer to the race engineer. And I'll start with the race engineer. So the race engineer is the guy that's in charge of the operation and running of that car. And that means what setup's going on the car, what components are you putting on the car, or is it least involved in the process of, talking to the people, chief race engineer, technical director, whatever else, like, right, what's the best setup for this? And that's, the whole loop of running all the simulations but there's also a lot of logistics and politics that impact how you run a car, how you run a test plan. The race engineer is responsible for that. The race engineer is the direct point of contact with the driver on the track all the time. I would never, as a performance engineer, I would never speak to the driver on the track just because it's the driver has one ear and one voice in his ear the entire time. And then when the driver's back in the garage, the performance engineer obviously will talk about their systems. So the race engineer is kind of the operations guy. They're also involved in strategy and everything else directly. For example, when you hear the driver say, "I don't know about that," and maybe sometimes the language that the driver uses, the race engineer, well, actually, you have to translate that. And it sounds subtle, but sometimes the way they say things, that you get used to working with that driver's language. So, for example, GP's case, he'd be like, Max said this, and like, okay, does that mean these tires, like, you don't want to run the mediums or you don't want to run the softs? So there's that kind of thing in the communications, the operations. Is that the performance engineer is mostly looking at making sure that everything on the car, with the exception of aero, is behaving as expected, and even the performance engineer will be, superficially or top level looking at aerodynamic performance to see if it matches the expectations. It's like, you know, in a straight line, if you're observing that the aero balance is 75% with DRS off, you might be scratching your head thinking something's not right. But that's a very trivial example, and that rarely happens. But brake performance, making sure the brakes are working from a performance point of view, making sure that you have the right cooling specification. So monitoring if you have enough blanking on the brakes that they are operating in a good window. The carbon brakes on a Formula One car can be extremely temperamental. So if they're too cold, for example, you're gonna have a tough time. And if they're too hot, they disappear out from under you pretty quickly and often catastrophically, um, which is never a good day in the office. Differential performance, brake balance configuration, and then, for example, like when you hear a driver telling or an engineer telling the driver, "Oh, you're losing time here." Most likely, that's the performance engineer that's monitoring that lap by lap, corner by corner, saying, "All right, compared to our teammate, we're continually losing here." Get in the driver's ear when it's time, and that's when the performance engineer, will push that information to the race engineer, and then the race engineer finds the right time and the right cadence and the right tone to use with the driver to communicate that information effectively. So
Yeah,
there's
that's
a lot going on.
yeah, that's super enlightening. I mean, I think that just your explanation there really opens the window into just the intricacies and the roles that there are on the team and how everybody brings, a different level of specific expertise, a specific, value to this big, I don't want to call it a circus, but it's
Oh,
kind
it's
of like
definitely
a
a
circus,
circus. It's
right?
definitely a
Yeah.
circus. Don't get me started. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
it is definitely like that, and everybody has their responsibilities, their direct reports, and there's so much other stuff. Like you've got control systems engineers who are monitoring the hydraulics performance, the upshifts, the downshifts, the behavior of the clutch. You've got electronics engineers making sure it's behaving correctly, that the ECUs are being cooled properly, and everything else. All sorts of things. And there's this, like we were talking about before the pod. There's like all this stuff actually that you don't get to see nor appreciate how important every person that's at the track, their role is. Because to put it shortly, if your job doesn't need to be done at the track, you're not at the track. Like passes are expensive, flights, accommodation, all of those things are very costly, and that's another topic. Is that aspect of Formula One in the cost cap era, but People are asking me, "Are there any room for computer science engineers at the racetrack?" And I was like, "Why does a computer science engineer need to be at the track? You need to be writing software back at the factory," And it's like one of those things that it's easy for me to say that, but it's actually with like, just talking now, it's like you appreciate how little people get to know about the sport because of what kinds of media and content that they have to consume. It's like you've got the television. What are you going to understand from the television or whatever, you know, Ted and Crofty tell you, you know? And there's definitely a lot of new excellent technical content coming out on the mainstream channels, which is so beautiful. I love to see that.
Yeah, for sure. We're definitely in a really exciting era of motorsport. I mean, with all the content that's out there, and podcasts like this, and
Yeah.
you talked a bit about race setup and performance and things like that, and performance engineers' role. One of the things I always wondered is, let's take a very recent example from Zandvoort, right? I mean, you look at day one Friday, Max has the unfortunate, basically the car completely stops for him right on the track. I think he lost the transmission, right? And then they lose free practice one completely. Then they come out for free practice two and they're nowhere with pace.
Yeah.
They're very clearly like off where they think they should be in performance. And then something happens overnight that then in free practice three, they've got the car in a good window. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what happens between like free practice two and free practice three in a situation like that? And teams are just trying to wrestle what's going on with the car and what they need to do to change it.
Absolute panic, chaos. People are getting fired. No. Yeah. It's an interesting because it really depends on the nature of the problem. And then the most important aspect of that is, does the team understand the problem? And I'm gonna extrapolate a little bit, and you see some teams in the midfield with wildly variable performance. And I have to say that those kind of issues, there's always circuits which, suit a car or might not suit a car, and you hear that talked about all the time. And I don't need to get into that, but there's teams that are struggling, and those people are the people that have a shocker of a Friday and they throw the kitchen sink at it, and they also have a difficult Saturday and Sunday. So, but then other days they rock up on Friday and they look like rock stars, and they probably capitalize on a little bit on Sunday or maybe not. So Friday night shocker, and you've got one. And P3 is a dress rehearsal. Honestly, you get to throw two sets of tires at the car and be like, "Well, did that fix it?" Because if you rock up to P3 and you're having a crap time, it's particularly unlikely um, that you're going to resolve that for qualifying, unless you knew what you're doing on Friday and you said, right, I think we've got a direction we could try for P3 on Saturday. And if it doesn't work, we'll just roll back to what we had on Friday and we'll be great. So a lot of those things, honestly, in Formula One are when a team is having a shocker of a weekend or a difficult session, it's one of two things most often. Um, One, tires. Are the tires in the window? Does the team understand what that window is? Did they make the wrong assumptions about compound A to compound B? Did the balance change with the soft versus the medium? By how much? Did you underestimate how much that was? Because you have to think about that. When you throw on a new set of tires, teams will often make a aero balance adjustment or change the front wing to put more load on the front of the car. Well, usually you start to learn, through experiments throughout the season pretty quickly what that is. And that doesn't change that much, the characteristics. But, say something else is happening, that tire's not working, you get in this vicious cycle of, was it this or that? Was it this or that? And then that leads me on to the other thing is, if you don't have your tires working, that's one thing. But what if your car aerodynamically is not behaving as expected? And we've seen that a lot this season. I hate to pick on them, but we've seen that a lot this season with Mercedes, and that is, m- it's no secret that that is a major source of their woes from a performance and consistency point of view, which they do seem to be sorting out. But those are the two main things. Are there characteristics or features of the circuit or conditions that hinder your aerodynamic performance. Let's say, for example, of classic is was it what's the hairpin before the 180-degree corner at the back of Circuit of the Americas before the back straight? Is that turn 10 or 9? I'm
I think it's 10. I think
yeah.
it's 10.
Yeah, because 11's anyway. Yeah, that should ex Formula One engineer can't remember corner numbers. Um, but that's one of those tracks that section 7, 8, 9, 10 is super exposed, and the number of times across what 6, 7 different cars I've worked on all have massively different responses through that corner. And if it's super windy and your car is losing loads of aerodynamic load, I mean, you can identify that, but like, what do you do? And then the conditions change and it comes back to you. So conditions are huge, and those are one thing that catches people out, and their ability to understand, get the tires working, and keep them working through an entire Grand Prix. I think that's
Yeah,
kind of like that's the hook, line, and sinker of that one.
I think that's something that maybe the casual F1 fan that's not really into, the technical side or into the details of the sport maybe doesn't understand is that how sensitive these cars are, maybe in these new aero regulations than before to the
Mm,
track conditions. I mean, track temperature, right? We've seen wildly different performance from cars from when
absolutely.
it's a cloudy day on a Friday to a sunny day on a Saturday, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And when we were in Austria and then all of a sudden you've got a tailwind and Lewis Hamilton completely loses it and bends it, I mean, it's things like that that these cars are very sensitive to, the performance of the car is sensitive to, and if you, as you say, really don't have a fundamental understanding of your car and the dynamics of it, it can be quite a struggle, I imagine.
yeah. And let's put that in context. These are Formula One experts. These are the people on the teams, and they will sometimes, Friday nights are the longest nights at the track. The curfew's obviously making those shorter, but like you will leave Friday night sometimes scratching your head thinking, we're going to rock up tomorrow in the FP3. Are we sure how this is going to go? And that's actually a pretty tough feeling. And but I think, yeah, the casual will definitely miss, and often sometimes teams are getting it wrong. Look at teams struggling with tires. Look at teams making um not just kind of the wrong calls, but like massively the wrong calls because they haven't anticipated those changes. I mean, they'll probably have enough information and through this season gather the experience not to make those mistakes. But it's like the dude sitting on his sofa talking trash about the football players, and it's like, okay, man. Yeah, but it's hard. It is hard, and I will. I hate doing this. I hate doing this so much, Dr. Obbs. But there is a reason why Formula One is so exciting. It's because we often don't know what's going to happen, and sometimes the teams don't know it either.
Wow. That's a revelation probably to a casual fan who seems to
Yeah,
think, that the teams know everything. But I think it was quite eye-opening this year when, Mercedes was struggling a little bit and they would have this amazing performance, and George would put it on pole, right? And then the engineers would be interviewed after the after qualifying and go, "We have no idea what happened."
yeah, yeah, exactly. And Lewis has even been saying it. He's like, I don't know what side of the bed the W13 is going to wake up on. And the only reason it's such an interesting talking point is because they have absolutely dominated the entire V6 hybrid era. And we've had a regulation change, which has been mostly aerodynamic with a huge engine component in as well, which sounds subtle, but changing from, you know, mandating 10% ethanol content and then changing the combustion chamber and parts of the engine and them coming off on the back foot is a shock to me because to me, I've worked at Red Bull for what, 6, 7 years. And to me, Mercedes was always that methodical monster that with the time, they would put the resources and the money in the right baskets and they would come out punching. And then, but when you're on the top, the only place to go is down. But the recovery arc from Brackley is going to be cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, maybe let's camp out there for a minute. I mean, you spent time in Force India, which maybe middle of the road, team there, midfield, and then you moved up to Red Bull Racing. Kind of, I would say that next tier up. Can you maybe talk about what is it like going from a team that maybe is not experiencing a whole lot of success to now moving to a team that's a bigger outfit that's having more success? What's that like?
There's two aspects to that, and because both of those teams that I worked for, um, they were not full works manufacturers. They were a chassis or the team itself, and then they bought an engine from someone else. And that's an interesting difference between, or that's an interesting similarity between those two teams, which has got some interesting points on it. But the biggest difference was, so when I started at Force India 2012, when you got points, you were very happy. Fast forward to Bahrain 14, Checo on the podium. That was cool. That was super cool, being a part, like being on that car, being his performance engineer, and being with the team to get that result. That was magic. And then a year later, the performance engineer job came up at Red Bull, and come to find out, the job was for Vettel's car. It was to be his performance engineer on his car, because his current performance engineer uh, was stepping back to the factory to work on other projects and other passions in the industry. And so I got the job. And in Suzuka, it was announced, Suzuka 14 was announced that Seb was going to Ferrari. So I was a little bit disappointed, and it was like, because I was, Seb dominating Red Bull from those Ford championships was pretty special to me and exciting, because I was hyped up about Red Bull as a team. They were super. They had a different energy about them than the rest of the teams up and down the grid, and it was super cool and exciting for me as a young engineer. And then to get that, and then Seb moves on, but I actually had a blast working with Daniil, so I have no regrets. But it would have been nice to get to work with Seb a bit, because he was something else. I think he was something else, not as just a driver, but like as a person. I think he's a very interesting dude. But Red Bull as a team, you could tell immediately that they had a lot more money, a lot more people, but I can say this, I don't think they did everything better. I genuinely don't think they did everything better. Like, for example, you take Force India. Force India was the best bang for your buck. Like, performance per dollar spent, Force India was spectacular then. Uh, and then you go to Red Bull, who have all this cash. They've got the results. They've had a very difficult introduction to the V6 hybrid era with Renault. 2015 wasn't much better, but you could tell that they had money to spend on problems, and it was like new parts, new parts. You're taking front wings to every race weekend. Hand luggage, front wing. It's just come out of the paint shop. It's going in the baggage, which I don't know if you're seeing that now, because I haven't been in an airport during a race weekend in ages, but new floors every weekend. If you smash your floor up in practice, new floors going on for P2. Or is it Force India? It's like, if you smash your floor up, it's like, well, great, we got to take that off the car and repair it for P2, because that's the only one we've got. But in terms of, with the money and the ability to scatter fire problems, you also, in some instances, lose a bit of the method, let's say. Does that make sense? Because you can you
Yeah,
can say, oh, that didn't work. We'll just try this. That didn't work. Let's just try this. Whereas Force India, you couldn't afford to do that. It's like, we're
for
broke.
sure.
We're broke, man.
Yeah,
VJ's out of cash.
yeah, yeah. That I maybe we should do a whole podcast on what that was like
Oh,
with VJ. But
I feel like if you had somebody that was there from the early ages, as soon as it came out of Midland Spiker and into the VJ, the Playboy millionaire money, that would be even more interesting, because I missed a lot of that stuff. But
yeah,
that was
but
pretty
I
cool.
think you mentioned something that in this cost cap era, I think is something that we are seeing, right? Is that teams are having to be much more efficient. As you say, where Force India was having to do it just simply because they didn't have the cash, and Red Bull Racing maybe was, making it rain dollar bills everywhere.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
you can't do that anymore. I mean, I think probably the best place that we saw that was in Austria, right? Whenever I think it was Austria, where Lewis and George both crashed, and they had to rebuild their floors from pieces of the one spare
Yeah,
floor
yeah.
that they had, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
and teams are having to generally have to be a lot more efficient with every single aero up or whatever updates they're bringing to the track. They have to be much more intentional nowadays than they used to.
Absolutely. And like you nailed it completely. The hit rate has to be good. Your tunnel has to be well correlated to the track. Your CFD needs to be very effective. Your simulations need to be as good as possible, and very close topic to my heart. Your simulator models better be damn good, and your correlation to the track better be phenomenal. Otherwise, teams that have a better simulator program than you, oh, they're testing when they're not live a lot more. And you need to make sure that you're making use of every ounce of data that's coming out of that Ethernet cable or that fiber optic cable. You need to be converting that into useful information. And if you're not, the team that's doing that better will win. And that will help drive their wind tunnel, which will help drive, all the systems. And it will increase your hit rate to bringing high quality, high performance parts to the track. And to be fair, we're kind of in that stage where I'm surprised. I'm honestly surprised that we haven't seen anybody show up to the track with a package this year, like as an upgrade to be like, holy cow, that brought a load of performance. When somebody shows up and they're instantly 3/10 a lap faster, and it's like, where did that come from? All you have now is it's kind of like a lottery of Red Bull, Ferrari, who's going to get pole is, and for the most part, you'll see Mercedes, like for example, the Red Bull underperformed massively in Hungary, but Mercedes put everything together there, and it was like, well done, George, well done. Spa was another difficult one for them, but like we haven't seen anybody bring a 3/10 of a second upgrade in a hot minute, and it's interesting
Yeah,
because it's
all
it's a whole new regulation set, so it's like somebody's
that's right.
nobody's cracked the code yet.
Yeah, I was gonna say all we have is Twitter rumor and conjecture where somebody's gonna come to the track and gain 7 tenths, and then it never
Yeah,
happens, right?
yeah,
It's
and then everybody
but
loses a quarter of a second. He's like, where'd that come from?
exactly, but and I think that realization should really hopefully get people to see just how hard this sport is. I mean, you simply like you say, you don't roll up and then all of a sudden you're making up a second on the track. I mean, you are scratching and clawing for a tenth, for 2 tenths. And
Bro,
that's the name of the game.
you don't even want to know what I would do for 2/10. You know, like that kind of thing. It's crazy. It's like, but the other very interesting thing though is how important the driver is in that puzzle. Because
Yes.
you see it driver. There's the narrative that Lewis has been doing tests the whole part of the season, and George has been driving a safe car, and then there's you see them converging now, and they look like they're on the same level. Sometimes George has got a better day, sometimes Lewis is having a better day. You see Checo struggling a little bit, and then you see, for example, um, signs a little bit off of Leclerc quite often. You're like, what is that? And it's like this whole other layer of understanding the driver machine, you know, mesh, and how does that
Yeah.
work? And that's another insanely complicated topic. And I don't
Let's
think
talk
anybody,
about it.
I don't think
I've got a
anybody's got it
question.
cracked. I don't think anybody's
I've
got it
I've got a
cracked.
yeah. I mean, I've got a question because one of the things that you hear is you hear some, whether they're technical directors or or they're doing a documentary on a particular driver, from 30 years ago or something, and you hear these comments where they'll say, "Look, he was almost like one of the engineers." Like drivers who just get it. They understand aero, they understand car dynamics, but they've also got this amazing feel, and when they're racing the car, they're just one with the car. I mean, you've
Mm.
had the opportunity to work with, Paul di Resta, Checo, Daniel Kvyat, I mean, Max Verstappen. I mean, what is it like when you have a relationship as a performance engineer with a driver that just gets it? I mean, what is that relationship like?
I I feel like the first time that I think all the drivers are super different, but the first time I think probably the easiest time I had was working with Max because first of all, he would drive the living crap out of the thing from FP1, um, which surprised his teammate quite a bit at the time. It's like, holy, used to building up, and he's like, nope, I'm gonna go destroy the front wing in free practice one. I'm gonna
Full
find the limit.
send.
Yeah, I'm gonna full send from one, and that people are like, ah, nah. I'm like, okay, well, I was there, and that's how it was. So it was super interesting to see that, and it takes a little bit of time to understand the language when you're talking to a driver because a lot of the time you can't sit around the table and look at data. You're having, you're exchanging words to describe a phenomena. It's like, what does that mean? And it got to the point where it's like, because I would do the differential configuration and how that behaves, which is a whole monster of a machine and a piece of software to set up and effectively tune all the, high speed, medium speed, low speed, entry, middle of the corner, exit of the corner. All like, it's a lot going on and it's complicated to set up. I would do the brake balance and engine braking, and after a while, I got really comfortable, and it was like that with probably it wasn't so comfortable at the beginning at Force India because I was so new to it. And then, the first year with Checo was new power units and that whole system changed. But then after that, probably with Dani and then Max, I was super confident in that. And like I could look at the information, I could take the driver's feedback, and I actually, you know, the amount of conversation we needed reduced so we could talk about other stuff instead of how do we set up the brake, how do we set up the diff, because I knew what they needed. Yeah, I could look at the data and be like, okay, that looks like that time this happened and this is the answer. And we'd try it and we'd have a backup plan in the settings and it would work 9.5 out of 10 times. And that was a really rewarding feeling to be like, I'm confident and competent at this. But the driver has to be able to elaborate to you what the limiting factor is. Because if they go out on a lap and they're just talking about the wind was a little bit like this, it's like, cool. What do you want me to do about it? you know. So yeah, that was cool. So when the driver is fast, things are easy. When the driver is slow, everything's crap. Basically.
Yeah,
And
I imagine.
any given driver can be slow or fast depending on the event, the car. Who knows how they're feeling, how they woke up, how much did they come off a holiday? Had they been partying? Which they're all professionals. They don't do that, obviously. But if they did, if they did.
I've definitely heard some stories about the way that things used to be back in the days, and they since seem to have settled down a bit from
It
what I
is
hear. So I'm
I
sure
f
you
I
have a
f
lot of stories.
I feel like I have a lot of stories, but I always feel like everybody's talking about back in the day, and I'm not convinced back in the day even happened. No, it was different though. It was a lot different. You can't afford to be goofing off as much. You can't afford it. Like there's
Yeah,
so much on the line.
a lot of advertising dollars, a lot of
Oh yeah, and
a,
don't forget,
a
like
lot on the line.
let's not. I know I've let some of the smoke out of the room and smashed a couple of the mirrors and probably shattered some people's dreams, but yeah, it is an entertainment business at the end. People are getting super excited. Like, me personally, um, we're engineers. We love the technical stuff, and you get frustrated by things that are not technically excellent and they're sacrificed for the show. Um, we could have a whole conversation on that. But at the end of the day, these cars are going around the track because sponsors are paying a lot of money to have their sticker on that track, on that car, and whatever else. It's a show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of show, I mean, you said you spent what, 6 years on the road, I think, right? Doing the trackside stuff, and then you transitioned then to the factory as a simulator performance engineer. Let's tell me about what made you decide to leave the trackside stuff behind and then move back to the factory to be a performance engineer, and then tell me about what a performance engineer, sorry, a simulator performance engineer. Tell me about what a simulator performance engineer does.
That's a pretty interesting one because basically I got tired of being gone all the time. I had so much stuff I wanted to do. Like I don't know, I like doing a lot of different stuff. I like hobbies. I was really into cycling. I wanted to go climbing. I wanted to go camping. I wanted to hang out with my girlfriend. And it's like I'm gone 26 weeks a year, including tests, going home to visit my family in America. It's like this for me isn't sustainable. And I see people that are lifers that are always going to do that job. And I had to have a very difficult conversation with myself to say, yep, this isn't for me. So then I was like, well, what are my other options? Like, well, you could be a simulator performance engineer, which was cool because the thing that bothered me about trackside performance engineering is it was kind of the same job every weekend, rinse and repeat. And you were so busy, gone all the time. You didn't really have that much time to chew into the really exciting technical bits of the car because you were there making sure the car didn't go slow, is how I summarize trackside performance engineering. Make the car go less slow. You don't make it go faster, you make it go the least slow. Um, so then I was like, okay, simulator performance engineer. So it's basically simulator performance engineer. It depends company to company and probably engineer to engineer, but is basically you are running the virtual race car often. So that includes being the race engineer, coming up with run plans, liaising with other groups to do tests. But it also gave me a lot of time to focus on improving the models and improving correlation of, I touched everything: tires, suspension, aerodynamics, looking at these things. And I wasn't the subject matter expert, but I was very good at identifying when those things did not stack up with reality. And I think that was one of my passions. And that's why I annoyed a lot of people because I wouldn't tell them your stuff's wrong. I would just tell them, uh, we can make this better. That was the correct phrasing to use, is like, we can make this better because I've noticed this. What do you think about it? And they're like, yeah, that doesn't look great. We've looked at that before. I was like, all right, we'll leave it with me. I'll dig into it. A lot of that was, understanding how the sensors on the car work. So it was like going back and stripping it all the way back to this really cool level, which was super enjoyable. Um, and yeah, I mean that was basically, it's like you're either running the simulator or you're helping improve systems that, systems, models, tools that help the simulator go better. One of my favorite things was data visualization and turning data into information that you can use quickly to quickly assess, do things make sense? Does this correlate well, first of all, and then does this add performance, yes or no? Because that, you're not looking in the simulator all the time. You're not looking for 3 seconds a lap. You're looking for consistent improvements in certain specific areas, and it might be less than a tenth of a second, which is driver variance on lap to lap. Yeah, it's more than that. So you're
And so,
looking
I
for
mean, in I was gonna ask, in preparation for a race, one of the things that we saw from Zandvoort was you had teams that came to the race with totally different strategies, right? I mean, you had the guys starting on the mediums, Mercedes, and then going for a one stop to the hards, was the plan, right? Until all hell broke loose. But and then you had, the Red Bulls and the Ferraris starting with the softs, obviously going for two stops. Um, when you're a simulator performance engineer, I imagine you're just in the details of all the pre-race planning, the strategizing and everything. How many different models do you run? How many different strategies do you develop based off of, the simulator to have a plan for what you want to do during a race?
I have to say that strategy is one of those things that relies very much on statistics rather than like, we've got this very super precise model that predicts all this behavior, this thing. No, I think um, definitely, definitely that's a lot of, observing, because that's what we're talking about earlier, is about chaos and things that you can't model very well. Tire performance is one of those things that you can model it to some degree, and you can use the models to understand differences between, this condition and that condition, but in terms of absolutes, might not always be accurate. You can't just plug in a number and say, "Tell me what the performance is." So in the simulator, a lot of it was mostly focused around aero and mechanical setup. So how much downforce you have on the car, what kind of ride height envelope are you going to run, how stiff, how soft, mechanical balance, in terms of like the anti-roll bars and how they determine the loads on the tires and high speed and low speed corners. So that was a lot more of what the simulator, let's say, was responsible for. I don't really think too much about strategy because a lot of that is making observations on what you get. I think is that. And like for example, the calls for the the medium start or the soft tire start. I think Mercedes very cleverly thought that, if we can go long, stay out of traffic, not spend too much time on the same strategy as the cars who are still marginally faster than us, we've got a shot. And we look at that. Look, I just finished reviewing that race in quite a bit of detail, and it was a very good strategy. And unfortunately, spoiled in part by the safety cars, but it's one of those things where you don't know, and like they knew they had to do something different, and it was a good strategy. I still don't think they have the pace gap closed enough to win outright, but they're getting closer. So that's one of those things. It's like there's a lot of also. We even heard Ferrari in the pre-event. Leclerc was in the press talking about we might try alternate strategies to see what we can stick to Red Bull by. You get basically to play two different cards. So if one driver is not there, the other driver could be. And that's always super interesting. But a lot of that, honestly, is a lot of some of that's from the hip sometimes, honestly, which is kind of wacky.
I
We're
imagine. I
talking,
mean, you have to be able to think on your feet,
yeah,
very quickly, make snap judgments because nothing ever really goes according to plan.
no,
It's a sport which is ultimately, you know, done by human beings who
yep,
can make mistakes and things can change, or whether that's the race director or that's the driver or that's the pit crew or whatever, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
things are going to change. And I think one of the things that I'm sure as a simulator performance engineer that probably really got you going is when you did all this work to try to get the car set up, the torsion bar settings, I mean, the
yeah,
ride height, everything into the window, and then you roll up there on Friday and you're the fastest car on the track, and then you get quality, I mean,
yeah.
I can
Or
imagine that that's a great feeling.
the best feeling was when you rock up on Friday with a dog and you grind Friday night in the simulator, getting the setup in the window, and you rock up Saturday and you're having conversations with the engineers. Like I would be talking to the race engineers when I was running the simulator, and like, right, what are you guys thinking that you need to solve? Like, because if you have to go to the race engineer and driver to get the right information. Like, if somebody writes notes, unless it's another race engineer that's done the notes for you, which we did have the benefit. My boss was, and because you're talking the same language, and it's not like 30 different people interpreting what you need. When we would rock up on Saturday, and the guy's like, "Yep, that's good now." When it was a dog on Friday, that's super rewarding, and that
That's
that got
awesome.
me pretty excited. And everybody pulled together in that way, and it was a really cool dynamic, honestly, to see that, because at the track you just kind of run what you brung. I know it sounds cliche, but literally you've got, I mean, if your car is a crapper on Friday and you don't get it sorted in P2, you're in the mud, man. You're down. but but you can come out of it. You can come out of it.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point right there to probably pause for a little bit of the bigger picture. And you mentioned something where you said, all the people that are not even at the track. I mean, there are people at the track and there's a a curfew, etc. But all the people that are back at the factory that are still working, that are working
Mm,
through the night to try to get the car performing better. And you know those of us who are couch engineers are sitting there talking about what the team should be doing or saying, oh, how come you didn't put it on pole, don't
yeah,
see all of the people that are working their tails off to try to get these cars to perform better.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's super crazy, but you, it's impossible to have the full appreciation. And there's even people inside the industry that don't appreciate all the wheels and where they need grease and why they need to be greased and in what way. So it's understandable, but it's absolutely staggering. We think it's just a bunch of cars going around a track, but it's like there's literally hundreds of people per car year round to make this thing happen. It's nuts.
Absolutely.
It's nuts.
Absolutely.
But
Blake,
it takes
what was I was going to ask, what was one of the most crazy experiences that you had when you were either working, as a trackside engineer, or in the factory? I mean, if you can speak on it, obviously.
I don't really have any of those like super, super crazy moments. It was just like this whole blur. There's so many crazy stories. Some of them I can't talk about, unfortunately. But like, one of the memories that sticks in my head the most, and like, it was probably uh Barcelona 16. So we basically, what was the race sequence? We just finished Russia. Danny had a really rough weekend and he got a bit of flack, and some of it was his fault and some of it wasn't. You know, you remember that one? Seb's gearbox got a little bit of a love tap, but
Yeah.
that was a bit story of two parts. But never mind that. But and keep in mind, Danny just come off of a podium in China. Uh, Russia, disaster weekend, terrible weekend for everybody. Um, and then get back to the factory, and it's like, hey, in the engineering meeting room, and myself, race engineer, go in with the chief engineer. It's like, all right, guys. So I've just been informed you'll have a new driver for Spain. He'll be in the simulator tomorrow. Get ready. That's actually crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's actually crazy. Then we rock up to that race. Uh, Ricardo out qualifies Max. So for anybody not familiar with that, super fine. That's fine. 2016 Barcelona was Max Verstappen's first race in Red Bull Racing. He was previously driving in Toro Rosso, but the big sister team said, "All right, you're coming up," and basically Max and Danny swapped seats from that point onwards in that season. And uh, there's a lot of luck in racing. That was Lewis and Nico's head-to-head year, and they ended up colliding into turn 4. And they were too fast. We weren't going to beat them, but without the two Mercedes in the race, it was on. And that first race was Max's first win, and that was insane. Like I
It's
can't even
amazing.
describe how insane that was. And for me personally, that was the first time I had been with a team and experienced a race win, and that was my first race win as a performance engineer for that driver. And the same was true for GP, who's his current race engineer. That was our first F1 race win, and that was pretty cool. It was pretty special. But
That's
that was
amazing.
that's crazy. It's like how you see all this crap on Drive to Survive and crazy dramatic things happening, but driver swap mid-season, rocking up to the next race with some young Dutch kid you just met who's super nice and super enthusiastic and super switched on, and he locks it in. That's yeah,
That's special.
that was super
That's what
cool.
that is. That's special. So, I mean, that's an experience that I think, like you say, that will live with you forever. But, what is one of the things that you learned through your experiences, working in F1 that you'll carry with you, no matter what you do, content creation, personal life, whatever. What is one of the things you learned through that whole experience?
Is it? It's hard to say the biggest one I've learned, but it's reminded me, especially in the motorsport industry, but in general, how small the world is, and life's too short to be a jerk to people. Put it that way.
Amen.
It's like that's one of my biggest takeaways is, especially in the motorsport industry, but it applies everywhere. Life is too short and the world is too small. to yeah, if you don't get along with people, just leave them to it. You don't have to be their best friend. But the other one is like the law of diminishing return and time management, which I struggle with now, and I've always struggled with it. But it's one of those things. It's like, if you spend, you get the last tenth of a percent of something done, you've done it wrong because there's 50 other things you need to be doing the first 80% of those tasks. So that was one of those, juggling acts because like Friday night was like, I've got a list of 100 things I need to do to make sure the car is as fast as possible or as least, excuse me, as least slow as possible for tomorrow. And I haven't done that whole list yet. So I need to make sure that I've prioritized that list and done as much as possible of the most important things on that list before tomorrow.
Wow. That's I can't imagine that feeling when you've
But it,
got
but it,
just a laundry list of things you need to do.
but I think that
And
applies for a lot of people in every day. And like that was one of those cool
yeah,
things. Like I try to start applying that to myself now because like content creation for me is Friday night every day. It's pure chaos.
yeah,
I've got 100 million things I want to do. Which ones do I do first? The problem I
yeah.
have right now in this new endeavor is I don't know what the important things are to do. So I got to figure it out. And that is the beauty of being in the deep end, sink or swim.
That's a good. Hey, it's like you've got my questions in front of you there, Blake, or something, because I wanted to transition now to what you're doing with the F1 content creation. I said before, you can find Blake under his name at, is it Brrake, right? At
It's three
break
R's. B
three
R R
R's
R A K E.
triple R.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned your latest video, which is the one on, from Zandvoort with Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Would Max Verstappen have caught Lewis Hamilton? And it's a fantastic video. Everyone who's listening, you've got to watch that one. It's really great. I just watched it today, and certainly is very data driven. I think when I watch a lot of the content that you create there, Blake, it's obviously equal parts your opinion on things, but also a lot of things backed up by data, and looking at track performance and lap times and degradation curves, cumulative delta plots, and all these kinds of things, which I think makes it really special, right? Because it's not just I know you say about all this fraud stuff, but it's so much more than that. Blake, it's really quality content.
I appreciate that. And that's the thing that I want to do is like I've got the experience. I'm building a platform, and I just like Twitter's a difficult one because you'll state an opinion. You've got 280 characters to cover all your bases. But like for example, like the platforms like YouTube or even like live streaming this kind of content on Twitch, but on YouTube, like I can break down most of the angles from it, and it's my job to make it as effective of a discussion as possible. And like at the end of the day, I actually don't give a damn who wins. I want an exciting race. I want as many question marks over that race when I finish watching it. And I want to go back into the data and I want to understand each one of those question marks to a certain degree that's possible. Because it's not always possible. There's so much chaos. Maybe we didn't have all the data. Maybe we didn't do, some drivers on 3, 4 sets of tires. We wouldn't have known the performance of everything. We wouldn't have known at the beginning of the race that the track was super green and actually, there's tires going a second a lap faster, fuel corrected at the end of the race and the beginning of the race just from the track improvement, without just looking at lap times and using, vibes, as we say, you can't do a whole lot. And like even me, like having a pretty well tuned eye to looking at a lot of these stuff, like, casually, I still have to go sit down and rip the lap times apart and look at what happened. I can't do it, but that's fine. You can have a discussion about it. There's nothing wrong with, sans, without data having a discussion. But honestly, I know you agree. Uh, but
Absolutely.
my goal is to convince everybody else that that discussion is even more fun than the vibes. During the race, go with the vibes. What do you think? What do you feel? After the race, dig into it. And if you don't have something to dig into, I hope that I'm making a home for people to come find very objective, data-driven stuff. I try if I have an opinion about something, I do my best to back it up. I'm not just gonna say, I'm not just gonna say, you know, Max is washed. Max wasn't fast. Max is slow. I can't tell you who there's no way to tell you who the GOAT is, who the greatest of all time is, but there's no objective way to do that because I don't buy into that. I have to have objectivity and I know what things I can and cannot be certain about.
Yeah, I mean, no lies detected there, Blake. I mean, I knew when I went down to Silverstone to watch the British Grand Prix, and I asked you if you were going to be going to the track, and you said you were allergic to the track. I knew immediately that you were not a stan, and that you were definitely somebody who, has had your experiences in Formula One, but is just having a great time with, just going through the experience of the race, not just on a race day, but in between races, digging into the data. And one of the things that I really, like about what you do, Blake, is because as you just mentioned, you put everything when you're doing the telemetry analysis into context. And that's something that you and I have talked about before, which is, as you say, it's not just vibes, right? You have to put it into context. Who was maybe, you know, in the laps they were putting in getting tons of DRS because they were in a DRS train, who was lapping through traffic, who was maybe on 10 lap old tires versus who was on, brand new tires or something. So, what is one of the things that you see, um, maybe people who are doing data analysis or people who are getting into content creation?
Are
I
you
don't want to
reading my
say
brain
doing
right now?
wrong. Yeah, I don't want to
Are
say
you reading
doing
my brain?
wrong
No, no,
because
no. Oh, that's dude. I was honestly while we were talking about that, I was having the exact same thought. Content creation. I'm just figuring it out, man. Like I've been doing it for a while, a bit in gaming now, and most entirely in Formula One content. But data analysis is one of those things. It's like as a casual, you're not really going to get a whole lot of validation on that stuff if unless you're inside the machine. And I don't mean casual and disrespectful. I mean somebody who is not privy to those discussions. You're going to have to reach a lot, and that's perfectly fine. I think the most exciting thing in this space is seeing how many people are genuinely interested and passionate about it, and they're not paid by a team to be interested and passionate about it. And I'm speaking specifically to the people that are, looking at CD plots, they're looking at lap time telemetry. There's, um, all the people in the tech Twitter group that are digging into stuff and they're having conversations and questions about it. And I think those are the most powerful and enjoyable things to do. And like sometimes I probably get a little bit frustrated. It's like I know the answer to this. Like it's not actually a debate, but actually it's a discussion. It doesn't matter. It's the journey. It's not the destination. And I do appreciate that. And just the fact that everybody's getting into data now gets me super excited because it's like I got people to share this with because I know that there's a niche for that.
absolutely. And I think, uh, if you had to give some tips to maybe somebody who's wanting to get into content creation, whether it's Formula One or gaming or anything like that, what's one of the biggest things that you've learned so far that you want to share with them?
Research is very important. Find out who your audience is, but more importantly than that, find something that you're truly passionate about. Because if you're not passionate about it, content creation is tough and you have to be extremely self-critical. So if you're criticizing yourself about something, maybe you've made some content, some videos, or maybe you're a writer, maybe you've done a blog, or and it's not performing well, it reflects on you and how you take that. So find out what you're passionate about, find out what you're interested in, find out who your audience is, and find out how they consume media, and then make it. So, you know, live streaming is one of my big things that I had been doing for gaming. And I realized that there was a big gap for that. Not a gap, there's plenty of people doing it, but nobody doing it from my angle in the live streaming Twitch space. So I was like, okay, that's cool. And I've found an audience there. Every time I go live to talk about Formula One data, people show up because I'm super passionate about it. Um, I'm experienced and I'm knowledgeable. And when I don't know stuff, I go research stuff. And it's like that's one of the things. I don't know everything. I will put my hand up when I don't know something, and I'll be like, you know what? I either don't know or don't remember. Let me go ahead and study that. So content's hard. You have to have a pretty. You have to be resilient because it's tough. I'm going to say this, and it sounds super cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think content creation has been more difficult for me than Formula One engineering. I'm not even joking, man. It's just a completely different machine. There's no system to absorb the slack when something messes up. You know, when something messes up, you have to figure it out. It's you
Yeah,
and you alone. Most people can't afford a team, you know?
that's right. Yeah,
So
you're on a solo mission there, and whereas maybe and it doesn't matter if you're talking about Formula One racing or whatever industry you might work in. If you're part of a team and somebody's having a bad day, there can always be somebody there to pick you up and to
yeah,
to carry the load. When you're doing the content creation, it really is about you, and
yeah.
it's about passion. And one of the things that one of the sayings that I have is that the difference between obligation and passion is that
Mm,
passion does not wilt at the first sign of difficulty, because
yes,
things are always going to be hard. But if you're
yes,
passionate, you can get through anything.
yeah. I agree completely. And it's like you can have a terrible month of content or performance, and you have to be super self-critical and super positive. I agree completely. And the other thing, like you touched on this, is like you don't like when you have colleagues, you don't have to go through it alone. One of the things I have found is you do not have competitors in the content space. You have potential colleagues and friends. Like, yes, you may be, competing for eyes in the same space, but if you treat that as, you know, if you want to, don't, I'm not saying chase clout, but I'm saying like if you find people's like, you know what, I really enjoy your passion about what you do. I'd like to understand that and share that thing with those people. I've met so many people, yourself included, in this space where it's like we're just passionate about this stuff. Make friends. You don't have competitors. You're not competing for Twitter follows. You're not competing for YouTube views. You're not competing for Twitch viewers. You are making connections with other people in your circle, in your space.
Absolutely. It is very much a relationship
Yeah.
oriented thing. And if you focus on the mission that you have, and I know for myself personally, one of my missions, whether it's helping co-host with this podcast Strip to Dip, which I've been fortunate enough to be a guest on a few times myself, or my new podcast there with Bryson Sullivan called Tech Heads F1.
Which is
um,
awesome, by the way.
I appreciate it, thank you so much.
It is so
And
good.
the main thing is really just teach, to discuss, as you say, right? Because we don't know everything. None of us are experts in everything, and we're all just passionate about the sport. We're passionate about learning, and we're passionate about having conversations. And I
Yes.
think for me, that's one of the things that, I've enjoyed so much about, the last hour that we've been talking, Blake, is that, it's
It's
been very
flown
much
by.
yeah, it's flown by, and it's been very much a conversation. And I think for me, that is just the theme of a lot of the things that you do, whether it's your Twitch stream or your YouTube channel or your Twitter, is that everything is very accessible, it's very understandable, and it feels like a conversation, even though, we may not be conversing through a YouTube video that I'm watching. I feel like, I'm engaged in all the content. So I want to give you some time, to really plug, the content that you're creating, also the where people can find it, what the different mediums are that you're, broadcasting your content on. And yeah, just let everybody know where they can find you, and kind of what the mission is of your content creation.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So for the most part, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch at Brrrake with 3 R's. So Brrrake. And then on YouTube and TikTok, it's Brrrake F1. So Brrrake with 3 R's and then F1. And that's where you can find me literally every week. Race analysis videos. Do a couple topical videos. I'm also adding a lot of stuff for Formula One education. I've done a great video of, if anybody's been inspired and wants to become a Formula One engineer, I've done an entire video on that, trying to share my thought process of the things I did right and the things I did wrong on my way there. Yes, there's, like we discussed at the beginning, Dr.Obbs, there's a lot of luck involved, and absolutely there is, but you can make so much of your luck. So that's another thing, is just not only talking about the sport and engineering and data analysis, but also sharing that stuff with other people. And because I'm out of the industry now, fine, I'm creating content full time on all of those platforms that I mentioned, but my other passion is inspiring new young men and women to get involved in this, because it's such a cool industry, it's such a cool job, and got it's growing, and it's changing for the better, I hope. For the better, I hope. I think it
Yeah,
is.
we all hope, and I think if we can just simply figure out how to make Twitter less of a toxic dumpster fire, then maybe we'll be, well on
You
our
know,
way there. But I
I
think,
think, yeah, I'm not sure we can fix that one yet, but um, whenever possible, use your platform um,
absolutely,
to be a voice of reason and kindness. And the thing that sucks is, a lot of the time, people will take a conversation and take it as a personal attack, and um, it's a little bit frustrating. I've got to be honest with you, it's super frustrating, actually, because it's like, my brand isn't controversial hot takes. My brand is data, my opinions, my thoughts, and I'm trying to be a nice guy, but sometimes it doesn't work. But I do my best, and yeah, I hopefully after this conversation as well, we can
yeah,
spread some of that positive energy and just take a step back and
absolutely.
appreciate this awesome thing that we get to enjoy together and have these amazing conversations about.
For sure. For sure. And at the end of the day, we're all passionate for the same thing, and that's
Yeah.
motorsport. And so if we just simply focus on the fact that we are all passionate, we all love this sport, and we need to be kind and respect each other, then I think at the end of the day, we'll be better for it. Blake, I'm so happy you took the time to join us
No,
today
thank you so
on the
much.
Strip the Dip podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope we get another chance to talk.
I'm looking forward to it already, man. I'm looking forward
Yeah,
already.
for sure. Thanks so much, Blake. Really appreciate it, and best of
M-
luck
My
with
pleasure.
everything
Thank
that
you
you're
so much,
doing,
Dr. Obbs.
content creation. Yeah. Take care.
Take care.